Okay, so we're picking up where we left off, and we're moving from plastics and some of the products that we use to some of the chemicals that we're using around our house and our schools. And pesticides is obviously a huge concern. I'm going to start off with this one chemical just to give you an idea of the depth of this problem. This chlorpyrifos, the common brand name in households as Dursban, was one of the most widely used insecticides. All the insecticides are nerve gas derivatives by and large. These are organophosphate pesticides. This was used starting in 1965. Many products, over 800 products, 20 million homes were sprayed with this stuff at schools, daycare centers. In our crop fields, it's called Lorsban, same product, same concentration. They just have a different brand name for the farms. Over 90% of our school children test positive for this substance. And in 2000, 10 years ago now, EPA declared this substance posing an unacceptable health risk, especially to children with known resultant brain damage. This is our protection agency. So what did the EPA do? Nothing. This wasn't banned. Actually, we relied on Dow Chemical in their infinite goodness to remove it from the market. But they did so over time. They didn't send out warnings to everybody, hey, stop using this, get rid of your supplies at home. They actually said, well, over the next couple of years, we will stop production of it. We'll gradually withdraw it from the supplies. Schools will often buy substances like this in 50-gallon jugs, and they keep it around to spray their fields, the classrooms, and they continue using it up until now. If they still have it, it's not banned. They can still use it and spray it in our classrooms. With no warnings, nothing to protect us. One of the things that we started to use as an alternative to some of these more toxic pesticides, we're looking for better ones, so to speak. So fipronil came out as a new pesticide. Unfortunately, this is a selective GABA receptor. GABA is a neurochemical that allows us to calm down, to basically like a filter. We can get rid of extraneous information. We can not listen to the air conditioning unit and the distracting voices by having this GABA filter in place. And this fipronil interferes with that activity, so we can have more kids with hyperactivity, attention problems. And in fact, there are developmental neurotoxicities that are known now from this newer pesticide. And there are genetic polymorphisms, you were here before, these variations in our gene pool that make us more susceptible to this. Some people, a small percentage, have more difficulty getting this out of their system, detoxifying it, than others. Chrysanthemum was another source of an alternative pesticides. These pyrethrins and the chemical pyrethroids are commonly used inside our houses now. When the younger people especially are exposed to it, it compromises the blood-brain barrier, that barricade that's supposed to keep stuff out of our brains becomes more leaky. And like in nature, there was a place for it. It decomposes very fast in sunlight. I don't know about you, but there's not a whole lot of sunlight in my house. So when we spray these things inside the house, we're getting more of a persistent toxin that won't go away for a long time to come. And again, a study done that showed that mothers exposed to these pyrethroids have a much higher frequency of autism and therefore any other neurologic or learning disabled children. They were using, these pyrethroids are used as in flea and tick treatments for the animals. And the kids play with the animals, right? They rub their faces into it and they get all that. Atrazine is another huge problem. This is, unlike most of the pesticides, this is water soluble. It is easily leached into the aquifer, goes through the soil and leaches into the rivers and streams. And the amount of atrazine in our tap water varies according to the season. So in the summer, spring months, we're getting more spraying. The levels go higher. The EPA requires communities to notify you if the pesticide levels, or atrazine level in this case, reaches a certain trigger point on average. On average is the key. So it may reach a much higher level in August, but if it's low enough in November and December, on average, it passes muster, so they don't have to tell you about it. All right, and the EPA's level, that 3 part per billion level which they need to tell you, is much higher than the 0.1 part per billion that we know is potentially hazardous. Another substance, methyl iodide, was developed for strawberry spraying. There was a rather sizable group of scientists, including 5 Nobel laureates, who cautioned the EPA not to approve this substance because it is a neurotoxic, carcinogenic substance, can affect a number of our glands, especially thyroid. It was approved anyway. This is sprayed on strawberries that you're buying in the store. If there's any reason not to buy food that doesn't say organic on it, think of this. This is what is allowed if it's not organic. Organic food means it's not allowed. We'll get to that. What kind of problems do we know? And like I said in the first part, I'm using autism as an example, but we could equally use any other neurodegenerative, musculoskeletal, any number of diseases that are very prevalent, all of these degenerative diseases, as the example. But using the autism example, the study of Mexican American children, that the frequency of autism was directly correlated, in this case, to the level of exposure to pesticides. And the level of PCBs and DDEs from cord blood was also associated with delays in development and impairment in attention span. See if water makes my brain work better. Another similar study showing the frequency of autism associated with spraying. We talked about polymorphisms. There's one of our genes called peroxinase that we don't have genes that were developed over evolution to handle pesticides. This actually is a gene that has to do with cholesterol metabolism, but it is able to break down pesticides. There is a weak allele, a weaker variant that doesn't break down pesticides well. And when we test kids with autism in this country, we find that there's a higher frequency of that genetic abnormality, or genetic variation, not abnormality. Yes, again, and these same kids in a country like Italy, where they don't use pesticides, there is no relationship between autism and the level of this PON1 variation. So it has to do with the genetic makeup within the environment that you're living. All right. Well, that's the farms. Well, how about at home? We are actually spraying a huge amount of pesticides in our lawn. That's what Green Thumb and all those chemical places do. They're spraying junk onto your grass. We're actually putting 67 million pounds a year on our 30 million acres of lawn. That's a lot of pesticide per acre. And who goes out there? Who plays in it? The kids. They go out, they roll around in the grass, or pets roll around in the grass, and then the kids rub their face into the pets. These are very long, sustained chemicals. They stay in the environment for decades, not for weeks or months. And once they get to our bodies, they stay there for a long time. So we really want to think very carefully about what we do around our house, around our lawn, inside our living rooms, inside our garages, about what the effect of this is. It is not a free ride. And whatever we spray on our lawns will again eventually run off into the streets and into the aquifers. We may be getting our water through our water filtration plants, that treatment plants, but the rest of the animals don't. The rest of the animals drink from the rivers and streams, and I don't think that we have a right to poison our environment and make them drink it where we wouldn't. That pesticide.org website is on the resource guide, and it will give you a lot of information about what pesticides are known to do. You can look up whatever's in your products that you have at home. Are they safe? Are they not safe? It'll also give you a lot of information on the resource guide for alternatives to pesticides, insecticides, fungicides, and there are many, many of them. We'll come to some of that towards the end of the talk. The household exposures to insecticidal sprays come in the form of these pest strips, the bait boxes, bug bombs, foggers, the shampoos we put on the animals, the flea collars, nasty stuff. And I don't think we should be exposing our animals to it, certainly not our children and not ourselves. When you buy something, you can look on the label and it says active ingredient. The reality is that a company that sells a insecticide spray has the right to decide what they consider active and what they don't. If they consider it an inert ingredient, they don't need to tell you what it is. So they'll tell you 99% inert ingredients. Well, some of those inert ingredients on a different product will be considered active ingredients because they are dangerous products. They don't need to tell you. They could just decide on their own. We do want to have a resource available where we can start looking at what can we do when we want to spray for the fungus on our roses. What do we do to keep the dandelions under control? Cleaning up our house, etc. And I spent the last 5 years or so putting together a resource guide that I think very easily gives you access to more resources than you'll ever want to look at. So it's a great place to start. The other thing about the pesticide, we talk about what we spray on the lawn, but the reality is that most of the pesticides in non-farmhand individuals comes from our food. Right? And the amount of non-organic food that we eat directly correlates with the amount of pesticides in our urine samples. And so for most of us, as I said, the food is our major source of these pesticides. The good news, they did a study with kids, and they said, well, what happens if we take them off? We put them on an organic food diet, and within 5 days, the amount of pesticide in their urine went to 0. That doesn't mean that their body detoxified. They're now all of a sudden pure. What it says is, the pesticides get into your body, they get into fat areas, they store away, but some of it gets excreted. So if you stop eating source food, you stop eating food that is not organically grown, then the amount of continued exposure disappears. The urine cleared up. There was no more pesticides coming out in the urine. So we have at least 10,000 chemicals that are accepted as food additives. Very few of these have been tested. None of them have been tested in combinations. We talked about that in the first hour, that what one substance does by itself may be magnified tremendously by exposure to other substances at the same time. So when we're combining substances, we get much more of an issue. So ideally, we want to eat organically grown food. that's locally grown. Why locally grown? Well, one, we want to support local farms and keep our community as healthy and wholesome as we can, and just to decrease the carbon footprint. We don't need to transport our food from California to get an orange when somebody down the road is really trying to keep their family farm going, and we should be supporting them. There are food collectives that you can become members of, really wonderful food that is very inexpensive when you become members. The Food Shopper's Guide gives you a listing of, I think that's coming up. No. So foodnews.org gives you a guide to the amount of pesticides in some 90 different foods. There is a simple list that I think will be coming up that breaks down the best and worst of the pesticide-containing foods. I carry that with me when I go shopping and helps me decide what I'm going to buy. I will be coming to that, I'm sorry. Let's just go on. So what does organic mean? It means that the food was produced without synthetic pesticides or fertilizers, without sewage sludge, and a lot of our sewage sludge gets cranked up, it's dried out, and put on the fields as fertilizer. So there's organic junk in there. There may be some bad stuff too, but they don't really care, and it's okay. It's legal to put sewage sludge on the farms. Without genetically engineered or irradiated food, the only way that you can now, today, avoid genetically modified food is to buy organic. That is the only food category that is guaranteed to be free of GMO foods. It also means that the animals received no antibiotics or hormones, and that they were fed organic foods without animal byproducts.
Can those be organic if they're watered with fluoridated water?
Fluoride is...
If the water supply in the area is fluoridated...
Yes. Yeah, fluoride is not considered in the organic rules. So, yeah, when I go shopping, like everybody else, you got to make a choice. You know, it gets expensive to buy organic all the time. So one thing that I do when I start looking at the various foods, and you know, a lot of times the organic is not all that much more expensive than the other stuff. You know, in fact, sometimes it's even cheaper. But I'll look at this stuff, and you know, sometimes I say, well, do I really want to buy it or not? And I'm looking at it. So I've kind of conceptualized it this way. Okay, if it's organic, it's clean, and if it's not, well, the alternative of organic is that it's been exposed to a whole lot of toxins, poisons. So that helps me with my decisions sometimes. Most audiences laugh, by the way. Are all dentists this dry? Here, go ahead. Okay, this is this organic shopper's guide. So I carry this in my wallet. The 12 worst foods. I know that if I'm going to make a decision based on money, what am I going to buy? Well, I'm not going to buy peaches and apples if they're not organic, but I'll certainly go for the onions, the tomatoes, the broccoli. Right? It enables me to make decisions based on how likely it is that they're going to have toxic chemicals in them. Okay. There's someone here trying to copy down this list. You can go on the website and get that information. If they're using phthalates and a whole bunch of other chemicals in our cosmetics, our fragrances, this is being absorbed into our body through our skin. Our kids hug us, rub up against us. Our lovers rub up against us. So we want to think about alternatives, and there are lots of non-toxic options that are listed in the resource guide. Same way with cleaning fluids. All of those chemicals that are under the sink, drain cleaners, there are really effective ways to clean our homes without spreading the stuff around. There are insecticides, pesticides that are very healthy. And so we don't have to send our kids out to play in our house or in our lawns. Cooking food in plastic releases the phthalates, the PVCs, the xenobiotic estrogens that we talked about, some carcinogenic substances. So we're not going to cook in plastic. We are not going to use plastic to microwave. Aluminum foil. Aluminum foil is fairly stable, but when it's exposed to acids, especially things like tomato or citrus, lemon, orange, it will leach out. Have you ever taken the aluminum foil off of the pizza or the tomato sauce, and you see little black dots on the aluminum, or a little hole actually will form on there? Well, aluminum doesn't evaporate. It's absorbing into the food. All right, so best put a little wax paper on over the food, and then tighten it down with aluminum if you have to. The non-acidic food is fairly stable, and that's safer. So cooking your meat on a foil is not bad. Cooking a tomato sauce on the foil is very bad. Use wax paper or freezer wrap to come between food and plastics. Water safety is a huge issue. Oh my God, somebody left. Yeah, so we want to know what's lurking under the surface of our water. And our drinking water is purified by chlorinating it to kill the bacteria. And then we add aluminum to form this aluminum chloride sludge, and it supposedly precipitates out. Unfortunately, there is residue aluminum and residue chloride still in the water. There's also hormones, pharmaceuticals, pesticides that are in the aquifers that are not necessarily taken out by the water treatment plants. What the treatment plants can do is they take out what they know to be there. Larger molecules come out very easily. Small ones will pass through, and if they're not specifically looking for them, it'll just get passed on through. When that chlorine and bromine and iodines or fluorine combine with carbon molecules, they form halocarbons. The most prominent are the halomethanes, and if you have three of the hydrogens replaced by various fluorines, you get trihalomethanes. These are pretty noxious substances, and they're pretty common in our water supply. The amount that we get into our body is primarily by breathing it. So the major source of the halomethanes and larger halogenated molecules come from our showers, just because they were standing in there breathing it. A chlorine filter will take care of most of this, and they're very easy to get, very inexpensive. The other thing you want to do is make sure that your shower still is well ventilated. We've built these showers now with the higher doors because that's supposed to be nice and fancy, but that decreases the amount of airflow. So we're breathing in this stuff even more. So a lot of us have gone to bottled water thinking that we don't want to go to our sink because our sink is full of all those noxious stuff. Well, you think about it, guys. There's only one aquifer on this whole planet. It's all connected. So bottled water is controlled by the FDA. Your tap water is controlled by the EPA. EPA is a much more conscious organization. The FDA regulations are much more lax, and most of the bottled water is much worse than anybody's tap water. Besides the fact that these are in soft plastic bottles, so we're getting phthalates into our bodies from them. And especially, this stuff wasn't sent to you in a refrigerator truck. This was out exposed to the heat. It's been out in crossing the country. I love the water that comes from Fiji. Think of the carbon imprint of that stuff. So we have all of that bottling, the transporting, and a huge landfill nightmare that occurs from bottling. So I really don't recommend bottled water for anything. The Americans are disposing of 2 million plastic bottles every 5 minutes. That's not what 2 million bottles looks like, that is. This is what we produce in this country every 5 minutes. And if you think about the landfill nightmare of a week, a year, or 10 years of this kind of abuse, it's kind of crazy. All right, let's move on to some of the metals. So lead was banned in 1970 from automobile fuel and paint, and that has made a huge difference. There's been a huge drop in the amount of lead poisoning in the kids. But unfortunately, it wasn't removed totally from the environment. We're still producing about 4,000 tons of mercury, at least into the atmosphere every year. Much of that comes from airplane fuel. And when they took it out of the car fuel, they didn't take it out of the aviation fuel. I've had one of the most lead-toxic kids I've ever seen lived at the end of the runway from a propeller airplane airport. It's not the jet fuel, it's the propeller stuff. As well as some of the cement manufacture, it contaminates most of the calcium, so a lot of the calcium supplements that we are getting. Coral calcium, for example, has lead or aluminum in it. The blood levels as low as 2 micrograms per deciliter will impact learning. This is a cheer study that was reported just a year or so ago. It showed that as far as the odds ratio for ADHD, that a blood level between 1 and 1.5, this is very low, 1 and 1.5, had an odds ratio of 1.28. It means there was a 28% increased likelihood that the child would have ADHD if their blood level was in that range. And it went up significantly from there. And I think this is really remarkable because the FDA doesn't require us even to report lead level unless if it's over 10. And the insurance companies won't cover lead detoxification unless if it's over 20. Right? So our laws are really not covering us. So what do we do? Well, we certainly want to clean up old paint if it's around. It's not only in the inside the house, but the soil outside the house. Some people actually have to get their soil removed and shipped off. A lot of the lead is coming from the pipes, not pipes inside our house necessarily. Some of the older solders were lead solders, but a lot of the communities have lead pipes in the streets and not coming into the home, but outside in the major plumbing. You want to run your water until it runs cold before you use it to drink or cook. Never use hot water to cook with. Right? That's going to contain more of the sediment that comes from the water heater, and it will have more of the sediment from the pipes itself. We want to avoid purchasing those toys from those little 25-cent vending machines. Stuff with the small metal parts, with paints on them. These kids are mouthing them, and there's been so much stuff in the news now. I don't need to talk about this anymore. You can actually buy something called lead check. These are like swabs that you can swab something that you suspect might contain a toxic metal, and you can test specifically for lead, arsenic, cadmium, mercury. There's different swabs for different ones. Not cheap, but it's a way to test some of the toys that you suspect might be an issue. And you can get that on the internet, or a lot of your hardware stores will carry that. Arsenic is becoming more of an issue. It's been used in the chicken feed. It's fed to non-organically raised chickens during the first months of life because it increases their feeding behavior, so they get fat faster and they are more profitable. The chickens excrete, and their arsenic is dense in their stool. That stool is then dried and spread as fertilizer. It is said and that arsenic in the fertilizer then gets converted to organic arsenic by the bacteria in the soil, which then gets picked up in the plants. And another common area that we're seeing as problematic is rice now, because rice is grown in a water bath. Rice in many parts of this country and around the world are just dense with arsenic. There is information in the website and that resource guide that gives you arsenic levels of chicken from fast food restaurants and chicken from the grocery store groups, for example. So there's just loads of information there. Mercury. Anybody know anything about mercury here? Little something. Yeah, it's certainly toxic. We're releasing 200 metric tons a year into the environment, this country alone. And we're not the major source. I think more of it comes from South Africa, where it's used in gold mining. Mercury will absorb gold, and then they evaporate off the mercury. So the mercury goes into the air, and they get this gold to use for our jewelry. Much of that comes from coal burning. Much of it comes from the medical and dental industry. I believe the fluorescent bulbs are going to be a source of much more now that we're converting to more of these CFU bulbs, these complex fluorescent bulbs. What makes a fluorescent bulb fluoresce is a mercury dust. That white powder inside the bulb is mercury dust. And there may be grams, up to 5, 6, 12 grams of mercury in these bulbs, or milligrams rather. It's a huge amount. When the bulb breaks, that mercury will evaporate into the air. So if you break a bulb at home, what you want to do is don't vacuum it up. That'll just send it up into the air. What you want to do is take a damp cloth, lay it on top of the broken bulb area, and collect it that way. Take it outside and let it evaporate and go into the air outside your home, where you're not going to be getting the concentrated mercury. But we should also be thinking about recycling all of those bulbs. The thought of putting the bulb into the garbage, where the garbage collectors, our kids' dads, are putting the bulbs into the back of the truck, it gets crashed, the mercury gets released, and they're sitting there breathing in the fumes of our fluorescent bulbs. That lamprecycling.com is one place where you can buy boxes that you can send your bulbs. You collect them long enough at home and send them back in to be recycled. A lot of the stores will now collect their bulbs back. So I think you've probably seen all this information. The EPA estimates 1 woman in 6 has a blood mercury level that exceeds the agency safety threshold. At least 60,000 babies a year are born with neurodevelopmental disorders due to their neonatal exposure to mercury. Between 300 and over 600,000 infants born each year have cord blood levels greater than 5.8 milligrams per liter, a level that's been associated with IQ problems. This is just a huge travesty. Well, the EPA has never identified a safe level of mercury, but they say to limit it to no more than 0.1 microgram per kilogram body weight. I just want to show you a little bit of math to help you understand what we do with these numbers. So if 0.1 microgram per kilogram is the limited advisory notice from the EPA, if a typical 150-pound adult were to eat fish, we would want to limit that to 7 micrograms of mercury to keep it under 0.1 micrograms per kilogram per day. Okay. So if the lower level fish have 0.2 to 0.3 micrograms of mercury, swordfish have about 1 microgram per gram of fish. So if that 70 kilogram person ate a 6-ounce flounder, they'd be getting 0.6 micrograms per kilogram. So that would be 6 days worth of mercury. So the EPA says, well, don't eat more than 1 or 2 fish meals a week. Right? That's where it comes from. And if that was a swordfish or a high mercury containing fish, it would be 24 days worth of mercury in that one fish meal. So they say, well, no more than one of those predator fish meals a month. That doesn't mean to eat one predator fish and 2 small fish. So it's just giving you, that's where those numbers come from. Right? So if we got to be concerned about the amount of fish that we eat, the fish got to be concerned about the number of people they eat. And they say, where does that, so why are we not supposed to eat humans anymore? Oh, because they contain toxic levels of mercury thanks to all their fillings in their teeth. I think this should be on all of your desks outside in the waiting rooms in your offices, you think? No. I'm going to breeze through this stuff. I think that you guys know. You want me to go through the calculations for how much mercury comes off of dental fillings? Yes, you know that? No? If our fillings are average 1 gram, half of that is mercury. 100 million new fillings a year comes out to 50 million grams or 27.5 tons of mercury that our dental profession is putting into our mouths every year. Your colleagues, not you. And there's 3 studies there. There is an article on my website that goes through the calculations of how much mercury comes off of dental fillings. Using those studies, the average 0.5 centimeter square surface is going to release about 13 micrograms of mercury per day. With 8 fillings, that would be 104 micrograms of vapor being emitted from those fillings. About 80% of that would be absorbed, unless if we spend our entire day breathing in through our nose and out through our mouth. So that's 83 micrograms getting absorbed into our body from 8 average-sized fillings. And a 70 kilogram adult with 8 fillings would absorb nearly 12 days worth of mercury, according to EPA regulations, every day. Right? 1.18 micrograms per kilogram per day from those 8 fillings. If they're little kids, they're getting much more from the same size fillings. Those 83 micrograms would be absorbed by pregnant mothers throughout their 207-day pregnancy, which comes out to 22,000 micrograms during the course of pregnancy. We were certainly concerned about the amount of mercury we were injecting into the kids with vaccines, which came out to 237 micrograms for the first 2 years of their life. Now we're talking about putting 22,000 micrograms into the kids during their gestation. I'm not showing you guys this. So, the FDA declared the dental amalgams that are safe now. I just thought it was interesting, probably a coincidence, that Margaret Hamburg became the director of FDA in May, and her previous job was as a board of directors at Henry Schein. Just a coincidence, I'm sure. All right, so if we're going to start getting our house in order, we want to clean up our own diet, we want to start eating healthy foods, and we've talked about organic foods. Our personal environment, about the chemicals in our yards and our garages and our basements, and promoting a healthy lifestyle so that we can be a beacon for others in our community, and practice inner peace. That includes eating relaxed so that our food gets nourished, so that we have time talking to our kids, talking to our families. It is said that Americans spend 4 hours a day on average watching TV and about 4 minutes a day talking to each other. And I think our meals is a vital time that we begin to form that relationship. Lots of fruits and vegetables, the more colorful the better. Preferably organic, locally grown. And minimize all those substances like sugar, aspartame, sucralose. Sucralose is a polychlorinated hydrocarbon. In every other industry, these are put into sealed toxic waste drums as toxic chemicals. I don't think we should be eating those things. Avoiding refined wheats, processed foods, etc. I think dairy products are not human food. They don't help with osteoporosis. In fact, they cause osteoporosis. Eating less animal meat, especially red meats, will help our bodies be healthier, as well as the environment. The rainforests are being cut down to make room for cattle growing so that we can eat more meat. They require far more energy than our SUVs, and switching to other foods would be helpful. Now, when we do eat meat, choose free-range meats that's lived their life in a more humane way. Junk food is an oxymoron. There is no junk food. A large amount of our antibiotics, about 50% of them, are being used in the factory farms to try to keep the animals alive to go to slaughter. So we can get political about all the industrial emissions and government regulation, but I think that we're going to have much more benefit in our lives and in our families by focusing on what we're doing around the house and around the yard and around our schools, and focus our energies there. On the website, on the resource guide, there's lots of information about eco-friendly paints. We want to avoid the vinyl wallpapers because it's a polyvinyl chloride, also because it traps moisture and grows mold. Hardwood flooring, avoiding the vinyl flooring. Recycled, so we don't have to cut down more trees. Wood furniture, avoiding particle board that emits these volatile organic chemicals. Louvered doors in our closets so that we don't grow mold inside the closets, get better air ventilation. Frequently open the windows, air out the house. Buy mattresses that are free of those flame retardants. Cover up the rips in our carpeting or in the upholstery. Organic cotton, if possible. Cotton represents about 35% of the pesticides sprayed in the world are used in cotton growing. HEPA filters to pick up this junk in our house. Wooden toys are so much safer than plastic toys, and I would encourage you to go to flea markets and get some of the old wooden toys. We talked enough about plastics before. Stainless steel instead of plastic utensils. Everyone yells at me when I say non-breakable glass. There is no such thing as non-breakable glass, but there is break-resistant glass that is a much better alternative, as well as stainless steel containers for our homes. We don't want to put hot food in plastics, especially, or oily foods in plastics. So the take-home message, well, is there a relationship between the rising level of autism, ADD, ADHD, learning disabilities, neuropsychiatric problems, these multi-system degenerative disorders, and the increasing levels of neurotoxic inflammatory hormone-disrupting chemicals in our homes, our environment, and our food supply? I don't think I could stand here and tell you definitively it has been proven, absolutely, but I think that it is clear enough that we need to be much more cautious. There is a precautionary principle that has been espoused back in 1998, and it basically says that when there is uncertainty, if we're not sure that something is definitely harmful, it might be unsafe, that we should take a level of caution and choose a safer path and not put this into our environment if we're not sure. And I think it compels us, as are the healers that you are, the advisors that you are, protectors, parents, to take that reasonable path of caution. I love the Chinese proverb. It says, unless if we change the direction we're headed, we're going to end up... no, let's do that again. Unless we change the direction we're going, we're bound to end up where we're headed. And here's a train that's obviously headed in a direction that is headed for catastrophe. So when do we do this? Well, a wonderful quote, and I'll read it. This we know. The earth does not belong to man, man belongs to the earth. All things are connected. Whatever befalls the earth befalls the sons of the earth. Man does not weave the web of life, he is merely a strand in it. Whatever he does to the web, he does to himself. This was Chief Seattle, 1855. I don't think we've heeded his message yet. I think we need to start thinking about it and begin to heed it soon, or we're headed where that train is headed. So yeah, the world is scary. There's lots of things I've talked about that we can look at as being just too much to deal with. But I think of it like when I was getting ready for my first kiss. You know, you kind of stretched your arm out, you kind of nosed up to it a little bit, and before you knew it, you got it licked. Yay, you guys laughed. I love that photograph, don't you? This is some pages from an older version of the resource guide, and it just gives you an idea of what you'll see there. It's broken down into different areas, so these are some household products. We're talking about skincare products, cleaning products. This first one up there, Skin Deep. Where am I at? Skin Deep, you can go onto that website and look up almost any chemical you can find in any product in your house. It gives you an idea of what's in there. And the individual ingredients tells you what kind of toxic, how safe it is on rating levels, and if it's not safe, what kind of problems they've seen with it. Sources of non-toxic art supplies, safer cookware, chemical-free clothing, various kinds of paints to seal off the cement in your garage so that the chemicals that spill don't clog up, don't get into the cement and leach out of it for months to come. Information on pesticides, some simple stuff that you can do your own, stuff that you can make, some ideas for weed control, fungicides, etc. Insects, moth controls, recycling, the green cleaning instead of perk. Information about becoming vegetarian, even just to give you some balance in your diets. Information on raw milk if that becomes an interest to you. Lots of stuff about water, how to read your water tests, how to determine what type of filter you want to get. If you've got specific types of water problems, different filters have different benefits for different types of chemicals. Organizations that you can contact to do testing in your home. And on information about metals and plastics and reusable diapers, just about everything we could think about. Every time someone's asked me another question that I didn't know, we would search it out and add it to the information. So it's pretty dense. And this is just a small scattering of what's really there now. Right. So we're talking about what seems like really a lot of work, and I know a lot of times it feels like this guy just don't get anywhere. You just struggle. But it is worth it. This is what we're looking for. We're looking to give our kids the best opportunity to fulfill their destiny, to be all that they can be. And I think that we can do it. And this guy says that you can do it. Well, that's the message. I hope that is helpful, and